Well, thank you so much. It's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you so much to Shirley and all of the coordinators of this event here today. It's quite impressive. As introduced, I'm Alison Szalwinski. I'm the Vice President for Research at the National Bureau of Asian Research, NBR. We're a Seattle, Washington, and Washington, D.C. based think tank in the United States that looks at policy issues specifically related to Asia. And so we're really pleased to have with us here today a great panel to kick off this event. I am, along with my colleague Michael Wills, co-editor of an NBR flagship program that we run annually called Strategic Asia. Each year we examine emerging trends in Asia, and the most recent research that we've conducted, which all of these experts here contributed to, looked at some of the emerging economic shifts in Asia and how they're playing out for different countries and some of the subregions in Asia. So, given the intensity of the strategic economic competition between the United States and China, the trade relationship between the two countries, growing talk of decoupling or now increasingly de-risking, we undertook to really examine the perspectives of these countries, how they're navigating some of these currents and how they're undergoing some of the strategic economic transformation. So I'll dive right in. As each of our speakers was introduced a little bit earlier, so I won't go into too much detail to introduce their biographies because I want to give them a chance to talk here. But we're going to start on this end with my colleague Michael Wills, who, in addition to being my co-editor for many years on this program, Strategic Asia, is also our executive vice president at NBR. And then we'll come down the line here, and Dr. Sohn, who contributed study on Korea, will speak to the findings of his research, followed by Gulshan, who focused on India, and then Shirley here will round us out on Taiwan. So to kick it off, Michael, can you open us up by touching on kind of understanding why these economic shifts in the region, why this is important for us to look at, why some of the trends that we're seeing are unfolding, and what exactly are we seeking to understand here?
Sure, thank you, Ali. I think we've seen a trend over a number of years that is partly driven by US-China strategic competition, but it's also been influenced by some other shocks to the international economic system. The pandemic was one of those, massively disrupting supply chains. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, as Governor Gilmore was just talking about, also affecting supply chains and shipping. We've seen accidents in the Suez Canal that have had a massive impact on global trade. And so I think for a number of years, governments have been increasingly concerned about economic security as a more fundamental item in their policies. And so what we tried to set out to do in this particular book was look at 6 countries and 1 region in the Indo-Pacific and ask the question, well, there's a big debate about economic de-risking, economic decoupling. Is it really happening? So I'll just make 3 broad points to summarize broad conclusions from the book, and then my fellow panelists will be able to dive deeper into the countries that they wrote on. So the first point I would say is that, yes, de-risking is real. It's real and it's here to stay. Every government across the Indo-Pacific, every government really in Europe is increasingly concerned about economic security. They're worried about securing imports of critical materials for their own economies. They're worrying about dependencies on other countries that might weaponize economic dependence. They're tightening export controls. They're screening investments more thoroughly. And so you see this trend toward de-risking, diversification, friendshoring. This is widespread now. It's playing out in different ways in different countries, but it really is here to stay. The second broad conclusion is that de-risking is very complicated. most of the economies we're talking about are also deeply entwined with China. We've spent decades now building a global supply chain where your investment, your manufacturing, your research and development might be taking place in China. And so it's very difficult for governments to balance the national security concerns that they have on the one hand and the economic growth needs for their countries on the other. So there's a real tension taking place within policymaking communities across the region. And then thirdly, I'd say, and one of the key conclusions that our authors reached in this book is that reshaping economic interdependence across Asia, it's creating dilemmas, especially for the business community. We're seeing an environment right now where governments are changing policies, they're changing regulatory frameworks, and if there's one thing business hates, it's uncertainty. But unfortunately, I don't have good news here. I think the next 5 to 10 years we'll be in an environment where policies will continue to shift, and that's really going to make it difficult for the owners of large companies to decide how best to navigate this challenging environment.
Great. So, Dr. Sohn, Korea, kind of to follow on some of those themes that Michael teed up for us quite nicely, Korea is a security partner of the United States, a very, very strong ally, but is inexorably linked with China economically. So, how is Seoul navigating this, navigating the U.S.-China economic competition and the pushes for decoupling while also seeking to achieve its own national interests?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting, including me in this great panel, and I'm really honored and pleased to be a part of this. South Korea is, I guess, it's a perfect example that the country is deeply embedded in the web of economic interdependence. And also it's as an American ally, and at the same time, it is squeezed between United States and China in terms of geopolitical situation. So you face the dilemma of economic interdependence and the national security, how to find a right balance between this commercial interest and geopolitical security interest. For the past 6-7 years, South Korea have faced the dilemmas and risks and challenges exactly on this score. South Korea is a country that, like I said, deeply interdependent with the major economies, United States, China, and Japan. And at the same time, South Korea has an asymmetric economic interdependence with these three economies. Asymmetric means that, yes, it is deepened economic interdependence, but South Korea is more dependent on those three economies than those three economies dependent on South Korea, which creates structural vulnerability and which creates incentives for those countries to use economic interdependence as a tool to serve their geopolitical, geoeconomic interest. And South Korea initially encountered China back in 2016 when so-called the THAAD, high altitude missile defense system, is an American missile defense system introduced to Korea. China opposed to it and exerted economic coercion to the Korean companies operating in China. So it is an attempt to use economic interdependence to force South Korean government to change its foreign policy, security policy. The second example, 3 years later, Japan, under Prime Minister Abe, did the same thing. They made export control of 3 key semiconductor chemicals, not to export to South Korea. I mean, control that. And Japan did it because the country won South Korea's foreign policy towards so-called history issues. In this case, it's an issue of forced labor, wartime forced labor. And in meantime, Trump administration also tried to apply Section 232, which is a national security clause to restrict South Korea's exports of steel and aluminum products to the United States. And there's a negotiation and compromise. So for the past several years, this is what South Korea underwent. And it is an issue of economic interdependence, but at the same time, national security issues are involved. And South Korea has to navigate through economic interdependence, which easily securitized and weaponized, and how to make a right balance between continuing commercial economic interdependence, while at the same time you're securing national interest vis-a-vis the key three players in the region.
Great, thank you. So India is a little bit different than some of the other countries in the region, especially the ones that we've been focusing on in this volume in this study, mainly just in terms of the depths of commitment with the United States, but nevertheless still faces some of the similar challenges in terms of navigating the winds of economic change, the decoupling trends between the United States and China. So can you just touch a little bit on India's role, its growing role economically in the region, and how that plays into its strategy for navigating these issues?
Thank you. Thank you, Capri, and thank you, Shirley, for this wonderful opportunity and invitation. Well, we looked at India-China decoupling in the context of not just only US-China decoupling, but also, the India's growing economy, India's increasing external economic engagements, India-China tensions, and of course, US-China decoupling and the whole Indo-Pacific narrative. So within this broader context, I think this is what we try to look at the situation. Now, India was always a big country. India was always a democracy. And you said different, India was always different in one way or the other. But what has really happened in the last, I would say, 25 years in India is sustained 6 to 7% economic growth. That has its own strategic consequences, and India's economy is also opening up. So as a result of this, what you have is today more than 35 strategic partnership India has signed, including with the United States, with the European Union, with Japan, with Russia, and with many countries in the global south. We also have close to 20 trade agreements now. But of course, during this period, India's relations, particularly economic relations with China, has also increased. I mean, India, in the 90s, trade was negligible with China. Now, for the last 20 years, China has become India's one of the major trading partners. And now what has happened, but India's approach towards China was always very different, very cautious. So trade has increased, but as far as investment from China, technology linkages with China was still very, very minimal. At the same time, India never participated in the Chinese BRI. At any project, India was very critical of many of the projects. So in that sense, India had, even much before the decoupling, de-risking debate, India was already kind of looking China in a much more critical manner. But after what has happened, the global decoupling at the same time, particularly India-China border tensions, so Indian government took many steps basically in the context of decoupling what we are discussing. Starting with India was the first to kind of ban more than 300 Chinese mobile apps. We took many steps to reduce Chinese imports, investment screening. But more importantly, what India has done after that, all the areas where basically we looked at those areas which are dependent on China. So the government of India has started the production link incentive programs to many of those areas, including with the semiconductors. So really, boost Indian manufacturing in those areas where they are dependent more on the Chinese. Now, we looked at all the data and many studies which have been done on India-China trade. So what we really find that, yes, some of the Chinese imports do hurt Indian industries, but at the same time, they are also very, very critical for some sectors and also for exports. So this is what the dilemma, like anybody else, India is also facing, and it has very serious policy implications, which we can discuss perhaps if there is a time. So yes, I mean, it's important. India has been very, very cautious, but the trade relations have gone. And even after decoupling measures, in fact, the trade with China has actually increased in the last 3-4 years. That has the same is happening perhaps with Europe and US, with other countries as well. So this is the kind of dilemma I think India is also facing, like anybody else. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think the case of Taiwan is particularly important and relevant for this conversation because Taiwan is really at the forefront of what you have labeled the China dilemma and what both of our previous presenters have already touched on for their own countries. So, you know, Taiwan has also a very complex security relationship with the United States and those strong economic links with China. So can you talk to us a little bit about how Taipei is managing this dilemma and navigating through it?
Thank you, Ali. And it's such a pleasure to be here, to have National Bureau of Asian Research as our partner and to have my fellow authors from the volume that I have never met to meet here in Taipei. I've met the other half of our 9 authors in Washington, D.C. when we launched the report. My entire research staff, actually, team at Capri helped with this chapter. So we're very proud to host you here today because what NBR is doing exactly is what we like to do, is to really bring the Asia-Pacific experience to help the world in innovation and governance. And in that light, Taiwan is a very, very special example. I want to highlight 2 years ago, CNN wanted to do a program on the hotspots of the world. And I said, hotspots? Which number are we in the series? They said, we're going to go through Ukraine, we're going to do Kyiv, and then we're going to do South Korea, then we'll do Iran, and then we'll do Taiwan. And I said, Taiwan does not fit in this at all. And they said, well, why? That was a 5-hour conversation, and they killed the series. So the long and short of it is Taiwan is very unique, very much the sharpest focus you can have on what I call the China dilemma, because just broad background, Taiwan today continues to trade. Basically, China is Taiwan's most important partner. 40% of the trade between of Taiwan's trade, two-way trade, if you include Hong Kong, is still with China. And this is after years, of course, of the Taiwanese government trying its best. And when you say Taipei, Ali, I think you wanted me to talk about policy and government, but I want to broaden it to the societal level because Capri's work is about societal resilience. As a society, how do we become more resilient? Economically, Taiwan is a powerhouse. Of course, South Korea was in that list of hotspot, and I think South Korea and Taiwan has a lot in common, very focused on hardware, very focused on China, very natural complementary partner to China, and very close to Japan and the United States in security. With all of those in common, of course, Taiwan is still very special because China has a much more long-term goal of including Taiwan as part of China. And therefore, what Taiwan has actually, when Taiwan came into globalization, when reform and opening in China started, actually Taiwan was the most cautious of all of these partners. India, South Korea, I think everyone jumped in hoping for more, and it was a very easy discussion with the society, but Taiwan not so. So if you look at the United States with export control and with investment restrictions, Taiwan has always had those restrictions vis-a-vis China. It is not something new. However, as the world globalized and integrated the supply chain, Taiwan became part of that supply chain and became very successful. However successful it was, societally, there was always anxiety and fear that this is going to have spillover. the economy spilling over politically and societally. This is something rather new as US-China decouple, but nothing new in Taiwan. What is new in Taiwan, of course, is after all of this integration, we see now Apple still makes phones in China through Taishang. And if Taiwanese business are supposed to follow their OEM customers, unless the US stops making in China, Taiwan will not stop making in China. These are public companies. These are companies that are beholden to their shareholders, to the society, their jobs. And so I think if you talk about decoupling, Taiwan has been quite remarkable. As the order comes down from top down and the environment completely changes in Washington, Taiwan now has reduced its foreign direct investment outward to now only 50% of cumulative FDI are in China, but still, that is $200 billion. Our society, our economy, depends on China in a way that is really not like no other, because to be resilient, we need to be economically competitive. To be competitive, we needed to be in China. And now as all of this is changing, and as Governor Gilmore says, we need to pay for our own defense. How do we do that if we're actually being squeezed and we're trying to actually pay for the decoupling? So I think at the heart of it is, how does the US incentivize partners and allies to actually help with de-risking or decoupling, and at the same time become more economically competitive and resilient so that we can all be safer?
Thank you. So I want to maybe look a little more specifically and look sectorally for, I think, Shirley and Yule, because there, as you mentioned, Shirley, are some similarities in what Taiwan and Korea are doing in this space. So can each of you touch a little bit on the importance of technology in the technology sector as these countries navigate exactly what you just touched on, Shirley, and you know, looking specifically, each of you talked about semiconductors in your study, in your chapter. So just kind of explore those themes a little bit further.
That's an important and difficult question. The recent case of America's Chips and Science Act that leads South Korean semiconductor companies to apply and receive subsidies from the American government and make significant investment in the United States. And at the same time, the companies applied and received subsidies have to comply to the guardrail clauses, which means that the companies who received subsidies need to restrict their trade and investment. I mean, they have to restrict the controls of those. So, which for the companies, the largest market is China, and they feel real competitive pressure from the Chinese companies, Chinese semiconductor companies. So restricting investment to their Chinese factories means that they might lose competitiveness. So this is a real problem for the companies. But at the same time, Shirley just mentioned that it is a national security issue. So how you compromise your business between the two, and the issue that comes up to the minds of Korean researchers and government officials and also company is that how you define the national security interest in this particular case, because U.S.-China strategic competition and America's view of national interest vis-a-vis China is quite clear and quite clearly mentioned in various government documents. But for South Korea, yes, China is a challenge is a risk, but you never define as a threat to South Korean security. Actually, South Korea does not really have direct security conflict with China. So that's the area that the two countries really need to discuss and consult. That how much security, national security interests are involved in this particular case, and how much of national security interests are concerned in a particular technology, which South Korean companies might not think that it is directly a national security interest, but American government or American companies may think that is a crucial national security interest. So we need to discuss and consult. We need a consultation mechanism to discuss these issues. Otherwise, there will be a continuous complaints from the from the Korean companies about this particular problem.
Thank you. I want to just put a disclaimer. Thank you very much, TSMC. Thank you very much, MediaTek, for being Capri's first and very important donors. And so nothing I say reflects anything that they would otherwise say. We are about innovation and governance. And the reason they supported us very clearly because innovation to Capri means both technological innovation and innovative ways of doing things, innovative policy. And I think because of this, they're very interested in public policy, in seeing the best that Asia Pacific can bring to the world. And in that light, I would say that technology and innovation is the dream, should be the dream of every country as they move from middle income to high income. Taiwan has deserved that spot in the world. It has become a high income society through innovation, hard work, and of course, at the same time, promoting values that Governor Gilmore just highlighted. Democracy, freedom, with all that, we can still make chips. It's quite incredible. I'm sure you've been reading about the culture clash in Arizona, how we can't get people to do those things that a democratically raised person would do. But here is proof. In Taiwan, you're free and you're still sitting there doing the things that you should be doing, making the economy more competitive. But this is a very big issue for onshoring, I think. As the United States wants to onshore, it has to bring back manufacturing. And frankly, Americans have a lot of choices. Harry Harding and I both teach at University of Virginia, and our students can work at a software company and design, go work in a foundry. I don't know how likely they're going to work in a foundry, even if there's a foundry in Virginia, but the whole prospect of bringing jobs back to the United States through onshoring, I think it's a separate question from whether how Taiwan should deal with the fact that it makes 92% of the most advanced chips in the world, and suddenly it's become a problem for the world, a problem for us, while we're trying to promote democracy. So I think this is a fundamental issue of how do we trust the global system, the rule-based world order, when everything we do is compliant with this structure, and suddenly, of course, we have to comply at our cost. And I think that the separate question for Taiwanese is, in 30 years, do we only have a semiconductor industry to rely on? That's a separate question. As a high-income society moves forward, and that's my personal research, we have to find diversification, new ways of actually making a society more innovative. We actually need more lawyers, more bankers, more of everything that makes this society more resilient. So at the moment, we're in the really crossfire between US and China in terms of the weaponization, the securitization of all aspects of technology. Everyone is concerned. As more and more things become securitized, what is next? How hard is it to make actually outdoor investment and to receive investments, and how difficult will the export control scheme architecture be for compliance? These are really huge efforts that have just been introduced the last few years. Everyone is trying their best, at the same time trying to actually make the economy more diversified. So I think if I could answer this in a macro way, this is a huge challenge for the entire society. At the government level, because the old style of industrial policy 1.0 is gone. late 1980s, we introduced the entire ecosystem of semiconductor, and all of the success has brought on, of course, now new responsibilities. And I think this is something that everybody here, sitting here, I see many people in industry, in academia. There are experts here who know much more than I do, who could talk about the design, the software aspect, because today, fundamentally, Taiwan is still a hardware-based manufacturing society. And for that, for us to move forward, we have to do a lot more, and that's why we have the next panel, a little bit of an ad.
Great teeing that up. So for India, Gulshan, if you could talk a little bit about the shifts that India is undergoing in terms of its previous kind of traditional approach to trade, particularly trade agreements, and some of the shift in strategy towards how it interacts with other countries in the region on trade.
Well, I think there is a significant shift which has taken place in the last, I think, 2 or 3 years. As you know, India was very cautious about trade agreements, at least for the last 10 years. Between 2012 and 2021, India did not sign any major trade agreement. I think the reasons were 2 or 3. One was that, the impression within the policy community was that India did not get full benefits from earlier trade agreements, particularly with ASEAN. And secondly, exports for many years were kind of stagnant. But now, I think exports are picking up. So India has signed now 3 or 4 agreements, one with Australia, with UAE, with Mauritius, and recently we have also signed with EFTA countries. And there is also possibility that very soon we'll have, by the end of this year, perhaps even before that, with the UK, and then later on, negotiations also very advanced with the European Union. So as things are changing, and even on the investment matters, I think there's more clarity. So now India has been very, very cautious, but now I think there's more, I would say, more confident India in that sense. And you also know that in the last minute, India also moved away from the RCEP. But that possibility is always there that India can come back, once things are settled, and then they have more confidence, even in the RCEP as well.
Thank you. So with the remaining few minutes we have, and in the very strong spirit of our Strategic Asia program, I want to ask each of our contributors to touch a little bit on some of the policy implications of all of the themes and shifts and trends that we've just been talking about. What do they mean for each country's policy trajectory, and what are some of the things that you would really highlight for policymakers to be paying attention to and potentially take action on in the years to come? So we'll start with Michael here on this end. Michael, if maybe you can touch a little bit on the United States, or if you have any other thoughts kind of for regional leaders more broadly, and then we'll come down the line here and conclude with Shirley.
Okay, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll be sharp. I think the US government will continue to be focused on competition with China. That's been a consistent trend from the Obama administration through the Trump administration to the Biden administration. And as Governor Gilmore said earlier, whoever wins the election in November, I would not anticipate a significant change in US policy. Shirley just said something very interesting about the dilemma that businesses face, which other sectors are going to get caught up in weaponized economic interdependence. And I think we should look to sectors in, say, biotech or some other areas where national security communities might figure out that there are potential military applications, or that new technologies are going to be the foundations of future economic growth. And in the interests of maintaining strategic edge, they will sort of prioritize those over other sectors. So I'll just stop there.
As for South Korea, the country supports America's de-risking strategy. South Korea has actually, taken great pains to diversify their, trading, and increasingly you decrease dependence, on China. For the past few years, and now United States is South Korea's #1 trading partner. So that's a big change. Two, South Korea defensively, I think, apply industrial policies to upgrade its technological capabilities, particularly in the field of semiconductors, to maintain the gap, technological gap between South Korean and Chinese companies. The third, I just mentioned that in order for de-risking strategy to be successful, I think United States will need to come together with its key partners, Taiwan here, India, Japan, and South Korea too, in, let's say, in defining the term national security, particularly in the case of particular technologies, whether this particular technology is really crucial to the national interest or not. You need to talk with your allies and partners. So far, United States decided, and then the Korean firms and Taiwanese firms come to petition, and then get some concessions. This process, has been there, but we need to be more proactive to work to reach to the level of cooperation and partnership.
Very briefly, in the last few years, the foreign policy debates in most of the countries in this region has been dominated by the Indo-Pacific narrative. And India has India has an ambition to play an important role in the Indo-Pacific. But so far, India's economic, I think the policy making has still not been that confident. So it has to integrate more with the Indo-Pacific economies, and this is what the major, I think, one of the policy implications of what we did in this chapter. So India has to integrate more and more with the Southeast Asian economy, the East Asian economies, since many of these countries are also integrated with the Chinese economy. So there is also a kind of lesson that India is still not integrated even with the Chinese economy. So India really have to integrate if it has to really realize its role as a major player in the Indo-Pacific region, and even with the Indo-Pacific economic framework, India is still not even partner of the trade pillar. So there are a lot of things which India needs to do to play an important role here in this region. Thank you.
Well, Gulshan, good luck with integration. Taiwan is trying to get out of the integration. So I think we all have some aspect of this that is every position is different. I think from the United States, the most recent Taiwan election shows there's high level of skepticism about the United States, its intention, its motivation, its ability actually to carry out whether it's Trump or Biden this November. So building trust with all aspects of Taiwanese society is the only way to bring its partners with it to make its policy successful. And that means actually not just government, not just corporations, but the society at every level, because if there's one place where the narrative is very, very actually strong from China and from the United States, this is it. On the island, everyone can tell you about what's in the Chinese press, what's in the English press, maybe less so. And that's my second remark, which is for the Taiwan government. My policy recommendation is we need talent in everything, not just in hardware manufacturing. So for decades, we've been building this ecosystem. We need talent in climate, in finance, in law, in accounting, so that actually we could be a more competitive, innovative society, and to have the capacity to go along with the US policy to make the world safer and more resilient. And for that, we need to have capacity, and hopefully the US also will build trust by talking to all stakeholders in this society so we understand what's going on and not believe that all these restrictions are really ad hoc and only suitable for politicians to actually create more votes. In that light, I would say specifically, for example, when you institute something like CFIUS, reverse CFIUS, all of those things actually matter a lot to Taiwanese stakeholders. And I think a large part of society feels that it's not consulted while it's actually being demanded to pay the price for America first. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shirley. Let's give a round of applause to all of our contributors.